The film opens with a 13-year-old kid, Becky, getting interviewed by the police regarding what happened in the woods, but she claims that she doesn't remember. We are then taken to 2 weeks before the interrogation, when Becky's father picked her up early from school because he's going to take her someplace special for the weekend. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, 5 inmates, 4 of whom are part of a crew by a Nazi sympathizer called Dominick, are being transported to another facility. Their names are Apex, Cole, and Hammond. On the way, Dominick and his crew exchange knowing glances, and right after, Apex starts choking the one inmate who's not part of their crew until he passes out. Dominick then informs the driver about the passed out inmate to get him to stop the truck. Right at the same time, Becky and her father stop at the gas station, where they overhear a news coverage about how 4 inmates had just escaped from a prison transfer truck. Becky pays no mind to it, as she slips some gummy worms into her pocket, and finds herself so taken by the sight of a family wearing matching shirts roaming around the grocery store. Feeling melancholic, she finds someplace quiet, and starts watching an old video of her late mother who passed away due to cancer a year ago. Once the father and daughter resume the journey, Becky throws a tantrum after realizing that they're headed for the family's lake house, because it's a place that meant a great deal to her mother, and as far as she knows, her father has been keen on trying to sell it ever since her death. But to her surprise, her father announces that he changed his mind about selling the house, thus dissipating Becky's anger. She immediately embraces her dog Diego with glee, but soon enough her anger returns when she realizes another car entering the lot. As it turns out, it belongs to her father's new partner, Kayla, and her son, Ty. They give Becky a warm greeting, but she remains hostile, while their dog, Dora, steps in to greet them. To diffuse the tension, the father asks Becky to fetch their other dog Diego. Back to the escaped inmates, Dominick and Apex are now dressed as cops, and they've pulled over a driver to steal his car. Once the driver steps out of the car, Dominick violently bashes his skull, while the man's young children watch in horror from the backseat. Becky's reluctance to accept Kayla and her son results in her silence throughout family dinner, until her father opens a conversation about how tough things have been the past year, but they need to move forward. It is at this point that he announces that he and Kayla are about to get married. As expected, Becky doesn't take this well. Her father goes after her, but the broken-hearted Becky stomps away into the woods, accompanied by her trusty pupper, Diego. She enters her old playhouse in the woods and begins thrashing things around in anger. She then pauses upon a painting made by her mother, and reminisces a heartfelt moment where she sang to her sick mother in the hospital. Back at the lake house, Kayla is grabbing the dishes when the bell rings, so she decides to check it out. When Jeff walks back to the house, he discovers that Kayla has let a man inside, who turns out to be none other than Dominick. He makes up a story about how he's looking for his missing dog. In the woods, Becky comes across a strange key in her old locker. It catches her eye, so she decides to keep it for later. Back to Dominick, once he sees Dora the dog, he starts making rude comments about how Dora is a mixed breed and it isn't okay to mix dog breeds, because they'd become soft and lose their predatory instinct. This of course upsets Becky's father, so he politely asks the man to leave, but all of a sudden, Apex steps in and begins choking him, before going after Kayla under Dominick's orders, and finds her hiding in the corner of a bedroom. Per Dominick's orders, he breaks her phone to make sure she doesn't call for help, but he doesn't have the heart to kill them, so he tells her to go straight into the woods, which she does, followed by Dora the dog. Around the same time, Becky overhears 2 suspicious men, who are none other than Cole and Hammond, walking about the woods, until they cross paths with Kayla, and ask them what they're doing there. The naive Ty answers that they're looking for Becky, but Kayla lies and says it's their dog's name. Seeing the dog is trailing after them, Cole shoots Dora in cold blood just because he doesn't like dogs. Becky witnesses all this happen from her hiding spot, and courageously heads out, leaving Diego the dog alone in the playhouse. She sneaks her way back to the lake house, and discreetly watches as her father, Kayla and Ty are rounded up in the living room. One of the goons reports that they've killed the family's dog whose name is Becky. Dominick then announces that he's going to pick up what he came for, and be on his way. Kayla, however, is convinced that these men aren't going to let them live because they've seen their faces. Dominick goes ahead and starts looking around the basement for something inside a tin box, and gets annoyed when he finds it empty. At the same time, Becky climbs her way inside the lake house through her bedroom window. Unfortunately, the basement ladder leads straight into Becky's room, and Dominick is climbing back up. Panicking, Becky quickly snatches her walkie-talkie, before Dominick sees her. Not wanting to make a sound, she hides right under the window while Dominick looks out in suspicion. He then brings out Becky's backpack from the room and shows it to the father. The backpack alone is apparently enough for him to conclude that the family has a little girl, and that Becky is not their dog, but their daughter. He explains that he's looking for a key with the symbol on it, but none of them knows about the key, so that leaves Becky the last one to question. Dominick begins demanding for them to tell him where Becky is, but the father tries to lie and say that Becky is in Atlanta with her mother. Seeing that Becky's phone is in the backpack, Dominick doesn't believe him, so he takes out his gun, but Jeff still stays with his statement. Dominick appreciates his dishonesty by shooting Kayla in the thigh. Shocked by the gunshot and Kayla's scream, Becky immediately speaks through the walkie-talkie, bluffing that she's walked all the way to the neighbor's house and used their phone to call the cops, which worries the four men. Dominick is confident that the walkie-talkie is a child's toy, and therefore there's no way its signal could reach that far, meaning that Becky is somewhere in the property still. Up next, Dominick and Apex usher the father out, and sit him down for a chat, saying that today is going to be the day Becky proves how much she loves her dad. Right after, Dominick starts threatening Becky through the walkie-talkie by saying that her father is going to be tortured, unless she hands over the content of the tin box in the basement, which he strongly believes she has. Intimidated, Becky blurts out that she doesn't have the key he's looking for, though Dominick never said the box contains a key. This of course confirms that Becky indeed knows where the key is. To prove how serious he is, he presses a scorching fire poker into the father's cheek, while making Becky listen through the walkie-talkie. He gives the father a chance to speak afterwards, in hopes that he'd beg for Becky to help him. But instead, the father tells Becky to run as far as she can. Furious, Dominick stabs the father in the gut with the fire poker, until Becky gives in and fetches the key. She then makes a dash towards her playhouse to get the key, but before she gets there, her father breaks loose from his binds and makes a run for the woods. He comes face to face with Becky and tells her he loves her, right when Dominick shows up and shoots him dead. The cruel man then runs up to Becky, and Becky, who is overtaken by anger, stabs his eye with the key instead before running away. Dominick returns inside the house with his eyeball hanging out of its socket, so he asks Hammond to cut it off for him, but the scissor he used is dull. Frustrated by his incompetence, he takes a knife and cuts the eyeball off himself. He then immediately orders his men to look for Becky in the woods. Later on, little Becky is trying to process her shock and grief by the lake, while Cole draws nearer towards her and teases her through the walkie-talkie he's brought with him. She quickly runs away when she notices his presence, and enters the playhouse where her dog Diego is. Cole tries coming in, but he backs away in fear when he sees Diego, because he's scared of dogs. Also, thankfully, he doesn't have a gun with him right now. He tries to convince her to hand him the key, promising that he won't hurt her or her stepmom and little brother if she does so. But being reminded of her stepmom only triggers Becky, and gets her more adamant to preserve memories of her late mother. This reassures her not to give up without a fight. And so, she gears up, and arms herself with a broken ruler, and exits through the top of the playhouse. To fool Cole, she throws a coin into the woods, and when he goes to retrieve it, she swings down with a flying fox she has installed, and stabs him with the broken ruler. She proceeds to stab him repeatedly with her homemade weapon, like a certified little psycho, and finishes the job off with the ruler. Back in the house, Apex checks on the bandage he put around Kayla's gunshot wound, and Kayla seizes this moment to ask him to consider saving them, because she knows that deep down, he has a heart. But before she manages to say more, Dominick summons Apex to talk eye to eye. He menacingly forces Apex to hold a gun against his chest, and reminds him of how they've spent 9 years in prison together. During those 9 years, he's been carefully planning how to execute this plan, so he'd rather die now if there's even a chance that Apex is going to betray him. As he feels guilty, Apex swears his loyalty to him. While this is going on, Becky sneaks back to the lake house, and throws one of the walkie-talkies down the porch for Dominick to pick up. Through it, she calmly threatens that she's capable of very bad things, which somehow seems to intimidate Dominick. Afterwards, he asks Kayla to try talking to Becky and convince her to turn herself over, but Kayla simply tells him the truth about her rocky relationship with Becky, and so nothing she says will ever get her to come back. In his desperation, he sends his 2 remaining men after Becky, while the little girl is keeping busy setting up an elaborate trap by the lake. During his search, Hammond freaks out when he finds Cole's maimed dead body, and just in time, Becky shows up, taunting him to go after her. She leads him straight to the dock, where he trips over a fishing line and gets punctured in the gut by nails sticking out of a plank. Becky then hits him with another spiked plank, until he takes control of the plank and tries to hit her but misses. Becky swiftly jumps on his back, until he staggers and falls to the water, screaming that he can't swim. As if all this isn't enough, she goes full psycho once again. She starts the motorboat and drives it towards him, letting the propeller crush him to death. On her way back, she comes face to face with Apex, the biggest and strongest of them all. Diego tries coming to her rescue, but Apex easily knocks him down, prompting Becky to immediately check on her unmoving dog. He easily scoops her off the ground, and tries carrying her until she fights back. This gets him angry, so he does the classic choke slam on Becky. But instead of finishing her off, he finds that he doesn't have the heart to cause any more harm to anyone, and tells her that killing people gives you baggage, and that it's not too late for her to get back on the right path. With that, he walks away, not caring what Dominick wants from him anymore. At the same time, Diego rises, revealing that he's still alive after all. The sky is dark when Becky reaches her father's dead body. She takes a moment to grieve for him and apologizes to her dad, before fishing out his car keys and heading for the lake house. She checks on Kayla and Ty through the glass door to signal them that she's coming to save them, right before Dominick walks in, so Kayla yells at him to get his attention and enable Becky to slip away. She asks why he's doing all this, which he replies by saying that he's a white supremacist, and that the key will help him purify his cause. Obviously taken aback, she calls him stupid and he attacks her, until they get interrupted by a car alarm. As Dominick goes to check it out, Kayla struggles her way to the kitchen, and uses the kitchen knife to free herself and Ty. Meanwhile, out in the parking lot, Dominick thought Apex have come back with Kayla, and he tries opening a car door. But then, this happens. He struggles against the Diego, until he manages to close the car door again. Now convinced that Becky's inside, he takes out his gun and is about to shoot, but as it turns out, Becky is inside the other car. She starts the car, and hits him with it, before crashing to a tree because she doesn't really know how to hit the brake. And because it's a smart car, it immediately summons emergency services once it registers the crash. Once Becky recalibrates, she heads to the garage, and takes a can of gasoline with her, while Dominick desperately looks for her. But unexpectedly, she starts singing, leading him to find her sitting by the fire pit. However, instead of killing her right away, he commends her for how ruthless and clever she's been, and therefore he'd like to recruit her if she'd like. He adds that now her parents are dead, he could adopt her, but of course she refuses. Becky then aims a gasoline-filled Nerf gun at him and fires it across the fire, instantly burning him. Furious and in pain, he tackles her and takes the key from her before aiming the gun at her. Before he finishes her off, Apex steps in and stops him. After failing to convince Apex to rejoin him, Dominick shoots him, and tries to shoot Becky, but she's quick to evade him. She finds her way back inside the garage, and gets the lawnmower, while Apex fights against Dominick. Until Becky comes swooping in and runs Dominick over with the lawnmower. Afterwards, Apex apologizes for leaving her alone to face Dominick, but instead of forgiving him, she shoots him dead too. She then observes the key, wondering why it's so important. Not long after, Kayla and Ty find her sitting by the barn with an empty look, and join her as police sirens come blaring in the background. We then return to the opening scene, where the police are trying to question her as to what happened, but she acts clueless. Later, a police officer expresses that she's worried of the violence this little girl is capable of, and this is where the movie ends.